Okay, we are rolling. Today's daf is Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. And I just want to review where we're holding because we're in the middle of the Amud, about 15 or 18 lines down, something like that. We saw in the Mishnah, the Mishnah's whole topic was Shchutei Chutz, was talking about when you slaughter an animal or you do the avoda of an animal outside the Beis HaMikdash. So the halacha is you get kares. If you bring the animal as a korban outside of the temple, you're going to get kares. Okay? So the Mishnah had told us is that there's an exception to that rule. The exception is only if the animal is fit for use as a korban inside the Beis HaMikdash. Will you get kares if you do it outside? But if the animal or the bringer of the animal is not fit, so then for that korban to be brought inside the temple. So the example was, let's say the bringer of the korban, he designated a chatas or an asham that is supposed to be brought at the end of a purification process, and he hasn't finished his purification process. So if he were to slaughter or bring that animal as a korban outside the Beis HaMikdash, he would not get kares, because you only get kares if it was kosher to bring inside and you brought it outside instead. That's what the Mishnah had told us. So yesterday we saw a chiddush of Rav Chilkiah, and I guess the best way to describe it is almost like a double negative equals a positive. What do we mean by that? Yes, it's true that if the animal is not ready to be brought inside, that you don't get kares for offering it outside. But what if you compound that, and the animal is not only shelo bizmano, but it's also shelo lishma? If the animal is being brought not for the sake of that korban. So we learned that the very first Mishnah in Masechah Zevachim, that with the exception of a korban chatas, any korban that is brought shelo lishma is still kosher. It's just not used for that purpose, but it's still a kosher. It's considered to be an ola, but it's not considered to have, the owner didn't fulfill his obligation, but the animal is still kosher as a korban on the mizbeach. So therefore, if I take a premature asham, which means I'm not ready to bring the asham, and I shecht it or I offer it up as a korban outside the temple, but I do so not only shelo bizmano at the wrong time, but I also do it shelo lishma. So I've got that double negative which turns into a positive, and therefore I do get kares. Since in theory doing it shelo lishma inside the temple is a kosher korban, so therefore doing it outside the temple gets me kares. Okay, that was the principle of Rav Chilkiah. We need to move further because we have a lot of ground to cover, but that's the principle of Rav Chilkiah. Yesterday we saw a brisa that the Gemara had tried to use as a support for Rav Chilkiah's shita. What did the brisa say? The brisa had said that you might think that excluded from kares are a number of animals that are done shelo bizmano. That was the way we had interpreted the Mishnah. So therefore, the Torah says in the pasuk of Shchutei Chutz, Shor mikol makom, Kesev mikol makom, Ez mikol makom, that even though the animal is being done incorrectly, you can still get kares for it if you offer it outside. But the example was an asham, and it left out a chatas. So the Gemara had tried to prove from there that this is in accord with Rav Chilkiah. Since you're doing it shelo bizmano and shelo lishma, you will get kares outside the temple, but only for an asham, because if an asham was done inside shelo lishma, it would still be a kosher korban. But if a chatas, which is excluded from the brisa, would be done shelo lishma inside, it would be pasul, like in that first Mishnah in Zevachim. And therefore, if you do it outside shelo lishma, you also will not get kares for it. That was what the Gemara had tried to say. We can infer from this brisa a support for Rav Chilkiah. The Gemara rejected that and said, no, it really means to say that both for an asham and for a chatas, you're going to get kares, and you're misreading the brisa. So we had rejected that, but at least we had attempted to bring it as a support for Rav Chilkiah. Now just bear that in mind, because we're going to see this brisa recapitulated in a moment. But before we do that, let's see another brisa, Tashma. And this is where we bring like 15 lines down, approximately, where the line starts with Tafshin, Tashma. Yachol shani marbe olas mechusar zman begufa v'chatas bein begufa bein beba'alim. You might think, says the Brisa, that included in the chiyuv kares for offering an animal outside the temple is included in this is an animal that's going to be used for an ola that is immature. Let's say it's within 8 days old, and therefore it's not kosher to be used on the mizbeach. Or if it's a chatas, whether the animal itself is not usable or whether the owner is not ready to bring that chatas, you might think that if you shech that outside the temple, you are going to be liable for kares. Talmud lomar ve'el pesach ol moed kol sheino roi lavo bePesach ol moed ein chayovin aleim. So that's the end of the Brisa. The Brisa says the pasuk seems to say that it has to be usable inside the temple, such that if you shechted it outside the temple, you'd get kares. But if it's not usable inside the temple, if you shechted outside the temple, you don't get kares. Now v'ilu asham shaira. But it leaves off a korban asham. In other words, asham is not cited in this section of the Brisa. Why would it leave out asham? If an asham also is offered when it's not ready to be brought inside and it's brought outside, you should also not be subject to kares. Why is an asham left out? So b'mayaskina. So what are we dealing with? Ilema lishmo asham nami lifter. If the animal is being offered lishma, so then for both the chatas and an asham, you should be off the hook for kares. Elalav shelo lishma. So what we can infer from this is a support once again for Rav Chilkiah, that we're talking about where you're offering it not only shelo bizmano but also shelo lishmo. So you've got that double negative, which turns now into a positive and makes you liable for kares for a korban asham. The only reason you're off the hook for a korban chatas is because if you were to offer that korban chatas inside the temple, it would be puzzle, even when it's done shelo lishma, and therefore when you do it outside, you're not going to get kares. But an asham that's done shelo lishma inside is kosher, and therefore if you do it outside, you get kares. So this is a support for Reb Chilkiah. So the Gemara once again says no. La'olam shelo lishmo v'Rabbi Eliezer he demakish asham lechatas tana ikar v'kol shekain l'tafel. The Gemara gives the same answer it gave to deflect the proof in yesterday's Brisa, and it says the same thing over here. That in reality, I'll tell you that chatas is one example, but chatas means to include asham as well, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, both when you shecht a chatas and when you shecht an asham, shelo lishma, it's taka pasel. And that's why for both a chatas and an asham, if you shecht it or if you offer it outside the temple, it's going to exempt you from kares, because if you were to do it inside, it would be puzzle. So therefore, if you offer it outside, you're not going to get kares. And that's the conclusion of the Gemara. And chatas is only one example, but really asham is implicit in that as well. So in any event, we have two brises that sounded like they support Rav Chilkiah, but the Gemara deflects both brises. Now we're going to see a third brisa. Tashma dechi asa Rav Dimi Amar Tana Devei Rabbi Livoi. Yachol shani motzi af olas mechusar zman beba'olam asham nazir va'asham mitzora. So the brisa starts off, and it was taught in the house of Levi. Now this is very important. Levi is the one who is teaching this brisa, Tana Devei Livoi, from the house of Levi, the sage Levi, who's a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? You might think, says the brisa, that I exclude from the chiyuv kares these types of animals where the owner is not yet ready to bring a korban, or when it's a korban asham where the owner is not yet ready because he's in the midst of a purification process. And how do I know that these are included in the chiyuv kares, even though you might think that they're excluded? My Talmuda, what's the pasuk? Amaravina shor mikol makom, kesef mikol makom, eiz mikol makom. So we want to prove from here, because of those extra words where the Torah specifies the specific animals, shor, kesef, and eiz, that even though you're doing it shelo bizmano outside the temple, nevertheless you will get kares. Now, this is the same brisa, almost verbatim, that we saw yesterday at the top of the Amud. The brisa basically says, you can't tell me that you're shechting it or you're offering it lishma outside the temple, because if you're offering it lishma outside the temple, our Mishnah says that you're pater from kares. So you must conclude that the brisa is talking about where it's not only shelo bizmano, but it's also shelo lishma. And that's the reason why for these things, for the carbon asham, where the owner's not ready, you will get kares, because if an asham like that was done shelo lishma inside, it would still be kosher. And if you recall, the Brisa had deflected that and said, no, not necessarily. You could learn the Brisa as going according to Rabbi Eliezer, where both an asham and a chatas will make you subject for kares, because even though, all right, whatever. No, the point is, that's what the Gemara says, ha-mai rumya, kidika amart. Why are you bringing this Brisa again? Just like we deflected it before, we can deflect it again. So what's the point? Just because you're citing it as being taught by Levi, why does that make the question any stronger than what we just previously asked? So Amar of Nachman, Bar Yitzchak, Mishum derami detana deve Rabbi Livoy adatani Livoy. So the answer is because there's a postscript to this whole brisa, to this whole story. Not only was this brisa taught in Levi's Beis Medrash, but Levi taught a second brisa that directly contradicts this brisa. Because the second brisa says, Asham Nazir va'asham mitzar sheshachtan shelo lishman kesherin v'lo alul ba'alim l'shum chov. As Levi teaches us, then this is straight out of the first Mishnah in Maseches Zevachim. If you take an asham of a mitzora or an asham of a nazir and you shecht it or you offer it shelo lishma, it's still kosher as a carbon, but the owner has to do a redo. He's got to bring that asham again. Now, shachtan mechusar zman b'ba'alam o shahayu b'nei shtei shanim v'shachtan pesulin. But if you shecht the animal before it's ready to be brought, so that animal, in other words, before the owner is ready, before he's finished his purification process, so then the carbon is pasul. Now, what do you see from there? In other words, the carbon is not usable because you're shechting an asham for the sake of the nazir, but he's not ready, so the carbon is totally pasul. Now, there seems to be a contradiction to the previous brisa. The previous brisa said that if you shecht something shelo lishma, so then, and you do it outside the temple, you will get kares. And here we're saying, how can that be if you shecht it shelo lishma inside? If you shecht it shelo lishma, v'shachtan pesulin. Previous brisa said that if you shecht it, shelo bizmano, before the right time. The previous brisa had said you will still get kares if you shecht it outside. Here we're saying that if you shecht it shelo bizmano, it's pasul. But the rule is that anything that's pasul inside, you don't get kares for outside. So how did we reconcile the contradiction in Levi? Mishani Rav Dimi lo kasha kan lishmo kan shelo lishmo. And Rav Dimi had reconciled Levi's two conflicting brises by saying that the first brisa was saying that not only did you shecht it shelo bizmano, but you shechted it shelo lishma. That's that double negative equals a positive, and that's why you get kares. And this second brisa is talking about where you shechted it lishma, and that's why it's pasul if you shechted it inside. The bottom line is that while we grant you that previously we had deflected this brisa by saying that it's not talking about shelo lishma, here you can't say that because Rav Dimi is quoted explicitly as saying that brisa that Levi first taught is shelo lishma. And therefore, QED, in other words, the Gemara is now saying, from here we can conclusively prove that there is a brisa to support Rav Chilkiah's assertion that when you have that double negative, that it is both shelo bizmano and shelo lishma, being offered outside the temple, you will get kares. Because basically, there's no wiggle room out of the interpretation of the brisa like we tried to wiggle out of it previously, as Rav Dimi had pointed out. So that's the whole cadence of the Gemara. Rav Ashi Rami Masnisan Abraisa, Umeshani kan lishmo v'kan shelo lishmo. And similarly, Rav Ashi had raised the contradiction that in our Mishnah it says that if you shecht or offer an animal outside the temple shelo bizmano, before the owner is ready to bring that inside, you don't get kares. And the Brisa says explicitly you do get kares. And he said the same thing, just like Rav Chilkiah had said. The Mishnah is talking about where you're offering it outside the temple, lishma, and therefore you don't get kares. And the Brisa, which says you do get kares, is where it's shelo lishma. So it's not only shelo bizmano, but it's also shelo lishma. And since you have that double negative, you achieve the positive of getting kares. Now, leimati havi tiyufte de Rav Huna. So now the Gemara says, let us suggest that this is a refutation of Rav Huna, because if you recall from yesterday's Gemara, Rav Huna was Rav Chilkiya's disputant. He said, I don't think that Rav Chilkiya makes any sense. How can it be that when you shecht something shelo lishma, you get kares? In other words, there's efficacy. But when you do it lishma, you don't get kares. There's no efficacy. So that's why Rav Huna disagreed with Rav Chilkiya. So therefore, is this brisa not a refutation of Rav Huna? It's not necessarily. Amr lecha Rav Huna, hacha b'may askinan kegon shehifr shtei ashamos lachrayos, dechad minayu meikara olahi. The Rav Huna Amar Rav, the Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Ashtam Shanitek L'Riya Ushchato Stam Kosher La'ola. And here's where Rav Huna will tell you no. You reconciled the brisa with the Mishnah Rav Ashi by saying that the brisa is talking about where you shechted it Shelo Lishma. I disagree. That's not what the brisa is talking about. You know why the brisa says that you get kares? Is because we're talking about a case where a guy in the brisa, a guy set aside not one animal for his asham, but two animals for his asham. Now, what do we know the halacha is when you set aside two animals for an asham? One is going to be my animal, the other one is my backup, is my insurance policy. So the halacha is one is going to be used for the asham, and the other one is nitek l're'iyah, which means that what you do is you let the animal graze, you let it develop a mun, you sell the animal so it becomes chulin, and the proceeds are used to purchase a korban olah. So Rav Huna Amar Rav says, if you skip that step and you instead took that animal, that second asham animal, and offered it as an ola, it's kosher b'di'evid. And basically what we're talking about in the brisa is where you set aside two animals for an asham, and you take one of those animals and instead of shechting it inside the temple, you shecht it outside the temple. Ipso facto, you've basically deemed this animal not your asham. So what does it become by default? It becomes an ola. In that situation, shechting an ola outside the temple, which would be kosher if it was done inside the temple, because even though it's shelo bismano, but it's not my asham anymore, it's my ola. And an ola does not have the stigma of shelo bismano. And that's the reason why you'll get kares for it. Not because it was shelo lishma, but rather because it was pre-designated through as being a secondary animal, as being an ola in the first place. And that's the reason why you'll get kares in the brisa, not because of Rav Chilkiya's argument. That concludes that sugya. If you're totally confused, I understand. It's a very confusing sugya, but we spoke it out. So if you need to roll the tape again, you can roll the tape. But now we're going weiter, and we're going to get into a little bit more easily understood terrain. The next part of the Mishnah had told us the following halacha, that the only time you're chayev for doing an offering outside the temple is if you're offering something that's meant for the mizbeach. But let's say you offer something on an altar outside the temple that's not meant to be an offering. Let's say it's meant to be food for the kohanim. So you take the meat of the korban chatas and you take it outside the temple and put it on a private altar. Do you get kares for that? No, you do not get kares. You only get kares for doing an act of avoda which would be done inside the temple on the mizbeach. So that's what but nothing else. The second thing that the Mishnah had told us is that if you do any intermediate form of avoda, such as hagasha, bringing the item close to the mizbeach, yitzika, you pour oil or libations, or misader hashulchan, or if you just organize the bread on a showbread table outside the temple, or if you fix the lights of the menorah, all these other things are not the final sacrificial act of placing the carcass on the altar. And as such, they are not considered to be subject to getting kares for if you do them outside the temple. It seems that the only thing that you get kares for is either shchita or ha'ala'ah, which is placing it mamish on the mizbeach.
No lashes for those other...
It's unclear to me what the penalty would be. It sounds like that there's no penalty at all. So the Brisa now says, Tanu Rabbanan, minayin lamala mi basar chatas, umi basar asham, mi basar kadshe kadshim, mi basar kadshim kalim, umi moser ha'omer shtei alechem v'lechem haponim ushyari menacho shepater. How do you know that when you offer all of these items, these sacrificial items that are meant to be eaten by human beings, that if you place them on an outside altar that you do not get kares, Talmud lomar oila, ma ola shehi re'uya laha'ala'a, af kol she're'uya laha'ala'a. So therefore the pasuk says, in the context of this ischi of kares, it says that it's got to be an ola, it's placed on the altar. Only things that are placed on the altar inside the temple will you get kares for if you do them on an altar outside the temple. So it excludes all of these food items that are not meant to be put on the altar inside. Minayin sha'af hayotzek v'habolel v'haposes v'hamoleach v'hamenif v'hamegish v'hamesader hashulchan v'hametiv v'haneros v'hakometz v'hamekabel b'chut shepater. And how do you know that pouring oil or mixing the oil and the mincha together, or crumbling the mincha, or salting the meat, pouring salt on the sacrificial meat, or waving it, or bringing it closer to an external altar, or organizing the bread on the showbread table outside, or fixing the menorah wicks, or doing kemitza, or doing kabbalah of the dam outside the temple. How do you know that there too you will be pater? Talmud lomar asher ya'aleh ola ozavach. Maha Allah shehi gemar avoda af kol shehu gemar avoda. So the Torah again says that it has to be that you place it up upon the altar. Only the actual placing on the altar, which is the final act of avoda, is what garners you kares, but these other intermediate stages do not get you kares. Next Gemara. This is really interesting because it gives us some historical lessons. The next part of the Mishnah tells us some history. It says, before the Mishkan was erected in the desert, the avoda was done by the bechoros. It was done by the firstborn. It was not done by the Kohanim. The Kohanim only took over when the Mishkan was constructed. So that was the first part. And then the Mishnah goes through, okay, then we have the Mishkan, and by the way, before the Mishkan was built, you could build private altars and offer sacrifices, right? Once the Mishkan was built, bamos, private altars, were now forbidden. And then until we get to Eretz Yisrael, and then temporarily private bamos are permitted once again until we erect the Mishkan once again in Shiloh, etc., etc. So there's a whole progression of history in the Mishnah. So Yasiv Rav Chana bar Rav Ketina, Kameder Rav Chisda, V'kakari vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. So it's not clear which one was reciting the pasuk, but one girsa says that it was Rav Chisda was reciting the following pasuk. It says at the time of Maimed Har Sinai in Parshas Mishpatim that it says that Moshe sent forth the youth of Bnei Yisrael, which is interpreted to refer to the Bechoros, to the firstborn. And Amar Lei, Hachi Amar Rav Asi Upisako, that Rav Asi, said Rav Chisda, held that this was the time of cessation. Now, what does that mean? So Rashi gives two interpretations, very interesting two interpretations. Pisako either means that this was the last time, the first and last time, that the Bechoros did the Avoda, because once the Torah was given, the Kohanim took over. That's one interpretation of what this line means. Now, this clearly is in contradiction to what? To what our Mishnah had said. Our Mishnah had said that the Bechoros continued doing the Avoda until when? Until the Mishkan. Mishkan wasn't built until the second year, right? So there's a discrepancy of close to a year of between Matan Torah and the erection of the Mishkan. According to Rav Asi, as soon as the Torah was given, the Kohanim started the Avodah taken away from the Bechoros. According to our Mishnah, the Bechoros are continuing to do the Avodah until the construction of the Mishkan. So which one is it? So that's that's one problem. Second interpretation of Rashi of Upisako is that you put an etnachta in the trup after the words at the point of Vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. Psik. You put a hefsik there because what does the next part of the pasuk say? Vaya'alu olos. That they offered olos. So what Rav Asi is basically saying is Moshe did not send the firstborn to bring olos. He sent them forth to do whatever they were supposed to do. But Vayalu Olos is not referring back to the first part of the Bechoros, but it's referring to the Kohanim. And so therefore, again, what Rashi is indicating is that even at the time of Matan Torah, the Bechoros were no longer doing the avoda. It was taken away from the Bechoros at the time of Matan Torah and given over to the Kohanim. Either way, whether you learn it the first pshat in Rashi or the second pshat in Rashi, the bottom line is that according to Rav Asi, he's contradicting the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the Bechoros commenced the avoda until the construction of the Mishkan. You're telling me that it stopped either right after or at Matan Torah. What's going on? So Savar la'osuve mimas nisan. So Rav Chana thought, maybe I'll challenge Rav Chisda from our Mishnah. So Shamei dek'omer mishmei de Rav Ada bar Ahava, Ola shehikrivu Yisrael bamidbar ena tu'una hefshet v'nituach. But then he heard him, before he had a chance to slug him up, he heard him teach a second thing. And that is that before the Mishkan was erected, and the Jews were offering their private olas in the desert, that ola did not require hefshet v'nituach. It didn't require the flaying of the hide. You didn't have to dismember it in any way. You took a complete carcass together with its hide and you burnt it on your private altar. So, osve braisa de shavya bekulu. So he said, I found the perfect braisa that will slug up Rav Chisda both from the issue of the Bechoros and the issue of flaying the hide. The Tanya, ad shalahukam hamishkan habamos mutaros va'avoda bebechoros v'hakol ksherim lahakriv behema chaya va'ov zuchar munekevos tamimin ubali mumin tahorin avalo tameyin v'hakol karvu olos va'ola shikriv yisrael b'midbar te'una hefshet v'nituach. So the Brisa says that before the Mishkan was constructed, you could have private altars, and the avoda was done by the Bechoros. So here, that's the first shlug, right? Because Rav Chisda said that immediately at the time of Matan Torah it was taken away from the Bechoros, but here it says no, they continued until the construction of the Mishkan. And then it says everyone is kosher to be makriv, whoever wants to bring a korban, and you could bring any animal that you want. It could be a behema, a chaya, or an oaf. It could be any kind of animal, even a bison, a deer. You could bring as a korban, provided that it's a kosher species of animal. It cannot be a pig, cannot be a rabbit or whatever, right? And then what's the wild boar, right? It can't be a wild boar. That's what you probably find in the desert. Now, but what's also kosher, you could bring males and females. You could bring even a balmum animal as a korban, and they were all by definition an ola. Before the Mishkan was built, all korbanos were olas, but they also required hefshet v'nituach, and they also required to be flayed and dismembered. That's the second shlug of Rav Chisda, because he said that before the Mishkan was constructed, you didn't need to do hefshet v'nituach. So, and then the Brisa concludes, and it says, "V'nachrim bizman hazeh rishoyin la'asos kein." That Gentiles today, even today, do not have any of the restrictions, sacrificial restrictions that Jews have as far as only being able to offer korbanos in the temple. If a Gentile wants to build an altar in his Thornhill backyard, he has every right to do so, and he can bring any kind of animal that he wants as long as it's from a kosher species. And he can bring a korban, even today. And that's how the Brisa concludes.
Even today, or
even today.
Barbecue.
That's right.
Barbecue.
Because there's no the biblical restriction on place and time for korbanos is only for the Jewish people. It's not for Gentiles. So anyway, so the Gemara says, so we have two contradictions on Rav Chisda. One about the Bechoros and one about the Hefshet V'nituach. So the Gemara says Tanoihi. You want to know something? Not a problem, because there's two different Tanoim. The Tanya v'gam haKohanim hanigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu. Because the Brisa starts off quoting the following pasuk, that the Kohanim who shall approach Hashem shall be sanctified. Now this pasuk is in relation to, again, Matan Torah in Parshas Mishpatim, right? It says also it's Parshas Yisro, if I'm not mistaken. The Kohanim shall approach Hashem and they shall become sanctified. Which Kohanim are we referring to? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, Zu Prishus Bechoros. And Rabbi Omer, Zu Prishus Nodavaviu. This pasuk is saying that everyone except Moshe has to move away from the holy mountain. That's what the pasuk is referring to. And it says even the Kohanim. Who are these Kohanim?
Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's referring to the Bechoros, because at that time, the Bechoros were still serving as the ministers, not the Kohanim. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is consistent with our Mishnah, which says that the Bechoros continued serving until the construction of the Mishkan. But Rebbe says no, that even at the time of Matan Torah, or shortly thereafter, the Ten Commandments, Nadav and Avihu were now the newly appointed Kohanim as the sons of Aaron, and they were the ones who were told, now you're the Kohanim and you have to stay away. That's who Rav Chisda is subscribing to when he says that immediately upon the giving of the Aseres HaDibros, that's when the Kohanim took over the Bechorah. So it's a machlokas tanoim. So now the Gemara goes into a side issue. Bishlam laman domer zu precious nadav va'aviu hainu dirsiv hu asher diber Hashem limor bikrovaya kadesh elo laman domer zu precious bechoros heicha remiza. So the question is it's a beautiful Gemara, by the way. It's a very, very touching Gemara. The Gemara tells us the story about the deaths of Nadav and Avihu as it takes place in Parsha Shmini. We know, what did they do? They went into Hashem's inner sanctum without permission and offered ketores, and Hashem took their lives. Moshe afterwards turns to Aaron and he says, Hu asher diber Hashem bikrovaya kadesh. That's what God meant when he said, I will be sanctified through my through my close ones, the ones who are the most close to me. So where did Hashem, what was Moshe saying? That's what God meant. Where did God ever say that? So the answer is, God had said it, if you interpret this pasuk in Parshas Yisro as meaning, Nadav and Avihu, you cannot approach. You cannot approach the holiness. So that's where God had already given them the commandment, Nadav and Avihu, you may not approach the holiness without permission. And Moshe is then reflecting and saying, that's what God meant when he said that. He meant to say, you may permanently not approach without permission the holiness, and if you do, you will be punished. So that makes sense. But if you learn, like Rebbe, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who says that commandment was not given to Nadav and Avihu, but it was rather given to the Bechoros, where did Hashem previously tell Nadav and Avihu that they were restricted from becoming close, such that Moshe could reflect afterwards and say, this is what God meant? That's the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara answers, Dichsiv v'no adati shama livnei Yisrael v'nikdash b'chavodi. Al tikri b'chavodi ela b'mechubadai. So the answer is because the Torah later says that I will appear there to Bnei Yisrael and I will be sanctified through my glory. And the Gemara says, do not read it as glory, but rather as my glorious ones. And that's what Hashem meant when he said, right, Hashem was basically alluding to the fact that at some point in the future, in this very place, the Mishkan, I will be sanctified and elevated through the deaths of glorious Jews, who I hold to be very, very precious and dear. What Hashem was alluding to was the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. And that's what Moshe was reflecting upon when he spoke to Aaron. He said, Hu asher diber Hashem. That's what Hashem meant. He was referring to, when he said that, he was referring to the deaths of your two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Davar zeh amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaMoshe v'lo yada'o ad shemeisu b'nei Aharon. Kivin shemeisu b'nei Aharon amar lo Aharon achi lo meisu banecha ela lahakdish shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is what Hashem had told Moshe. Moshe didn't know clearly what it meant. All God said was, I'm going to be sanctified through my glorious ones. Moshe didn't know what it meant. But once Nadav and Avihu died, Moshe turns to Aaron and he says, your sons died in order to make a Kiddush Hashem, to show the world that God does have parameters and restrictions, and that's what makes God so exalted and lofty. Kevin sheyada Aaron shebanav yidue makom hein, shasak v'kibel schar. Once Aaron realized that his sons were known by God as being God's close ones, so then he was silent and he received reward for his silence. Shenemar vayidom Aaron, as it says that Aaron was silent. V'chein b'David hu omer dom la'Hashem v'hischolei lo. And David said a similar idea, that even at a time of great tribulations in your life, silence is something that you will be rewarded. In other words, do not complain, but rather accept with silence. What did David say? Be silent to God, v'hitcholel lo. And normally that means to supplicate to him. However, or place your hope in him. However, he has a different the Gemara has a different interpretation. Afal pi shemapil lecha chalalim chalalim at shetok. That even if God fills your life, riddles your life with holes, you should nevertheless be silent. In other words, life could be filled with miserable holes in it. You feel totally empty and incomplete, and yet you have to be silent and accept it. Very difficult for some people to be silent. It's not easy, right? V'chein b'shlomahu omer, and similarly with King and with King Solomon, but the lefum tzara agra, the greater the pain, the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. V'chein b'shlomahu omer eis lachashos ve'eis ledaber. Solomon also said in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to be silent and a time to speak. Pa'amim sheshosek u'makabel schar ala shtika, pa'amim medaber u'makabel schar ala dibor. Sometimes your silence is the virtuous act, and you are therefore rewarded for your silence. Sometimes the speech is the virtuous act, and you get rewarded for speech. The problem we all have today is we sometimes get confused, and we're silent when we shouldn't be, and we speak when we shouldn't be speaking. But that's the wisdom of a Shlomo HaMelech. Know when you're supposed to be silent, and know when you're supposed to speak. V'hainu da'amar Reb Chia bar Abba amar Rabbi Yochanan, mai dirsiv nora Elokim mimikdashecha, al tikri mimikdashecha ela mimekudashecha. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. God is awesome you are awesome, God, from your holy place. Do not read it as holy place, but rather as your holy ones or your sanctified ones. Meaning, b'sha'as sha'osa HaKadosh Baruch Hu din b'kedoshav mityareu mis'aleu mishalel. That when God brings stern justice upon even the ones that he holds so dear and precious, God's name is exalted and sanctified because people realize God, there's no wiggle room to say, oh, God doesn't mind. God will be forbearing. No, Hashem says, even with my great righteous ones, I am exacting in judgment, and this will cause God's name to be filled, to be awesome through the world. Elakasha Ola. So the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. Beautiful agadata so far, but you only answered one stira, you didn't reconcile the second stira. The first stira was between the Bechoros and the Kohanim. So you said, okay, it's a machlokes tanoim. But what about the flaying of the hide? How could you, Rav Chisda, say that there was no flaying of the hide before the Mishkan was built for the Korban Ola, when the Brisa says explicitly that you did need to flay it and dismember it? So Trei Tanoi. That too is a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Klolos Nemru B'Sinai Uprotos Bo'ol Moed. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Klolos Uprotos Nemru B'Sinai V'Nishnu Bo'ol Moed V'Nishtaloshu Be'arvos Mav. Very important machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. It's in Maseches Sota, Maseches Chagiga, that Rabbi Yishmael says only the general headers were presented to the Jews at Har Sinai, and later at the Mishkan, and were they given all of the details of the mitzvahs. According to Rabbi Yishmael, they were only given the general rule of, bring a korban whenever you want. But there was no detailing of flaying and dismembering the hide. So that's what Rav Chisda is subscribing to. But Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva says all of the details of every single mitzvah were given at Har Sinai, and as such, the law of needing to flay and dismember was immediately given at Har Sinai, and that's what that brisa goes according to. So it's a machlokes tanoim. Amar Mar, hakol ksherin lahakriv. So what did we say in the brisa? That when before the Mishkan was built, you could bring any kind of animal as a korban. So minahani mili, how do we know this? So Amar Rav Huna da Amar Krav Vayiven Noach Mizbeach Lashem Vayikach Mikol HaBehemah HaTehora Umikol Of HaTohor. That it says by Noach, who's the exemplar of bringing karbanos without a temple, right? So what do we see? What do we see by Noach? He builds an altar and he brings from all animals and all birds as karbanos. So behema kimishmo chaya bichlal behema. So behema means both a behema. But the word behema also is used in the Torah to generically as a catch-all phrase for all mammals, for all animals that are mammalian, So therefore it includes chayas as well, because at one place in the Torah where it talks about the kosher and non-kosher species, it says that an ayal and a tzivi and a yachmur, which are all chayos, are included in behema. Those are the kosher behemoths. So therefore I know that Chai is included. And so we see, and Zachar Munikevos, Tamimim Mubale Mumin. When it says all animals, that includes male and female, and even blemished and unblemished animals. But La'afuke Mechusar Aver Delo. The only thing that Noach did not bring was an animal that was so blemished that it didn't have one of its limbs. In other words, it's one thing for an animal to have, a blemish, right? A punctured ear or limping a little bit. But if it had a whole limb missing, even Noach knew that he was not allowed to bring that. Now, how do we know that? So that's the next piece of Gemara. Let's just do it quickly.
I thought there were no animals. There were only 2. It was after the Mongol. There was nothing.
No, there were 7 of the kosher species. Right? So that's what he brought karbanos from. Now, and by the way, that's how we know that they had to be kosher species, right? So Amar Rabbi Lazar, that's a good point though, Alan. Amar Rabbi Lazar, minayin lemechusar aver shenasar livnei Noach. So Rabbi Lazar says, how do you know? How did Noach know that he's not allowed to bring an animal that is missing a limb? Tamulomar umikol hachai mikol basar. Because the language of the pasuk is from all living and from all flesh. Amra Torah havei behema shechayin rashe evarim shala. What the Torah is basically implying with this double language is that the totality of the animal has to be living, which means it has to have all of its limbs intact. If a limb is not intact, the animal is only partially alive because one of its limbs is not there anymore. So it's not fully. All of its limbs are no longer alive. So therefore, that's what the pasuk implies. V'dil malamu'utei treifa. But the Gemara says maybe I could read that pasuk differently. Maybe it's coming to exclude an animal which has a mortal injury. Only that animal is precluded from being brought as a carbon, but not a mechusar aver. So hahu milachayo zera nafka. So the Gemara says, but I have another pasuk, which says that the purpose of these animals is to propagate, to reproduce. So that pasuk shows me that a treifa animal could not be brought because a treifa animal cannot reproduce. The Gemara says, "Hanicha laman domer treifa eni yoledes, elo laman domer treifa yoledes ma'ikal." Remember, well, that's all good and well, but there's a machlokus about that. There's an opinion that says that treifa animals cannot reproduce, but there's another opinion in the Gemara that a treifa animal can reproduce. So what are you going to say according to that opinion? Ha'amar kra itecha bedomin lach. So for that I have another pasuk. The pasuk said, Noach, take with you on the ark. The word itcha means not only should you take them physically with you on the ark, but they have to be similar or akin to you in some way. Just like you are, Noach, are unblemished or are not a treifa, so too the animals that you bring on the teva cannot be a treifa, cannot have any mortal injuries. So that's the way you understand it, and that's how I know that a treifa could not be brought as a carbon. Now, v'dilma Noach gufei treifa hava. But how do you know that Noach did not have any mortal injuries? Maybe when he went on the ark, he did have a mortal injury.
When he came up, we know for sure because of
the aryeh, because of the lion.
No, not the lion. What Cham did is Saris.
Right, but that's not a mortal. Right, but even before that, the Medrash says that the lion mauled him. But anyway, okay, whether it's because of that or because of that, but the Gemara says those are not necessarily treifa blemishes. The Gemara is saying, how do you know that he wasn't a treifa? Maybe he had tuberculosis when he went onto the ark. How do you know that he didn't? So tamim kasivbe. So the answer is because it says that he was pure and complete. So maybe v'dilma tamim bidrachav. Maybe that doesn't mean physically complete. Maybe it means that he was complete in his ways. So the Gemara answers tzaddik ksivbe. To say that he was pure in his ways, we already know from the word tzaddik. So the Gemara says it must be he was physically intact. But no, v'dilma tamim bidrachav tzaddik b'maisav. But maybe no. Tamim means that in his ethics he was complete, and tzaddik means in his behavior he was righteous. So you don't see necessarily that he was physically healthy. So isal kadaitach denoach gufei treifa havami kamer le'lanoach dekavasach ayil shlamim lo ta'ayil. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, think about this logically for a second. Why did God say to Noach itach, together with you, akin to you? If Noach was a treifa, what? God is telling Noach, bring only treifa animals that are akin to you, and don't bring healthy animals? Where's the logic in that? So it can't be. It must be that the reason why God said itach, make sure that they're like you, Noach, is because just like you're healthy and do not have tuberculosis, make sure the animals are healthy as well. Well, that's the way the Gemara is learning. Okay, So now that you know that the animals cannot be treifed from the word itach, what is the words l'chayos zera? That the purpose is to propagate. What is that teaching me? Mahu detema itach letzavta ba'alma afilu zaken afilu sris kamash malon. And this is truly mind-blowing what the Gemara says. The Gemara suggests as follows. If I had not had the words milachayos zera, I might have thought that it would have been acceptable for Noach to bring old or castrated animals that did not have the ability to reproduce. Now, why would God tell Noach to bring animals on the ark if it was not for the purpose of reproduction? So maybe I would have thought that God wanted him to bring the animals on the ark to keep him company. And therefore, you need a pasuk to tell you, milachayos zera, to tell me, no, it's not just to keep you company on the ark, Noach. It's for them to reproduce and to propagate the earth once again. Now, the reason why I say that this is mind-blowing, that this is a very bizarre havamina, meaning that I might have thought that the whole reason why Hashem told Noach to bring on the ark every single animal, the lions, the tigers, the bears, the cockroaches, and everything in between, was only in order so that Noach should feel that he's not alone.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Seriously? That's what I would have thought? That's what I would have thought? So I gave a drush about this, which I'm sure you all remember. I gave it about 3 or 4 years ago. I quoted this Gemara in Zevachim. What is going on over here? The point is that what Hashem wanted to create for Noach on the Teva was a microcosm of planet Earth. And that was really what Hashem was introducing to Noach on the Teva. It had all of the flora and the foliage and the animals of an entire planet. I don't remember why, but I just remember vaguely. But that's really what Hashem wanted Noach to take. I might have thought that that's really all Hashem wanted for Noach to have on the ark with him. Not necessarily that every animal needed to reproduce of its kind for the future, but rather that Noach is creating a new world or is sustaining the old world on the Teva, at least just temporarily. That's what I would have thought. Hashem told him, no, you're going to carry on and create continuity, not only for the Teva, but even after the Teva. And that's the chiddush of the Gemara, and that's what Noach needed to be taught, is that it's not just for you, it's not just for your world on the Teva, but it's rather for future generations as well. Okay, this is where we'll hold it for today. Have a great day.